Our community welcomes all of you with great gratitude and warmth and love. This is a day of great joy, obviously, for Sister Celia and for our community, for our Carmelite brothers present here with us today, for you, her father, her sisters, her family, Sam. Joy for Celia's mother, who we believe is with us here today. And for our wider community who gather around us in prayer every Sunday. Joy for all who have witnessed Celia mature in life, in Carmelite life among us. Even more, this is a day that holds an immense hope and stretches toward the sum and summit of all conceivable fulfillment, as the readings for this third Sunday of Easter so powerfully suggest from Revelations. They impel us to hover in imagination between the now, today, and forever, between the time of this creation and visions of the new creation in the embrace of the cosmic Christ, who is forever luring us to God as our absolute future. The readings actually provide a marvelous focus for this so-called exhortation to the professed. Hearing the book of Revelation, I can't but see a long, long line of white-robed Carmelites. From our earliest days, or our early days, we have worn white robes over our habits. And so I see this long line of white-robed Carmelites, those we have known and loved in our lifetime, and those in the far past, rejoicing with us, glorifying God with us, surrounding us and holding us today as we accept and bless your desire, Celia, to join all those who have been carriers of the Carmelite tradition for over 800 years. Today, you take your place as the 137th sister to profess your final vows in our community since its foundation in 1790. When we put on your shoulders Mother Bernardina Matthews' mantle during the Litany of the Saints, we pass on to you our Teresian Carmelite inheritance. Yes, that truly, and our own communal spirit, a heritage of strong women, passionate in their desire for communion with God, treasuring freedom of spirit, steady in their determination to live on in the midst of the people, carrying their joys and sorrows, always with eyes on the boundless horizon of possibility. Edith Stein, a philosopher, our Carmelite sister, a saint, who died in the death camp of Auschwitz, believed a community, like a person, had a spirit, a soul. Some members become carriers of that communal spirit. Their personal being is so totally given to the beloved community that they are its very core, from which its spirit or soul is shaped, and which guarantees its enduring future and reality. The further their devotion extends, the more secure are the values and the outward face of the community. May we be so blessed in you, Celia. But what does this mean for you? The heart of Carmelite life is open before us in today's readings, the ones for Sunday, from John's Gospel, when the evangelist uses the image of the Good Shepherd, who calls his own by name, to conjure up major descriptions of the authentic disciple who hears Jesus, follows Jesus, and has eternal life. An unimaginable intensity of intimacy is offered here. Jesus knows his own, those who hear and follow, as the Father knows him and he knows the Father. Think what that means. As Jesus shares in the very communion of life that God is, so he wants his followers not only to live in intimate, mutual, transforming relationship with him, but to share in the very relational life of God, to dwell in that communion of love. Everything in Carmelite life is aimed at growing in intimacy with Jesus Christ, sharing his relational identity, his consciousness, living in the embrace of his communion with the Father and the life-giving Spirit, where the insatiable hunger and thirst of our souls is satisfied, where we drink of the springs of living water that St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross hold out to us. Their writings, our precious legacy, plunge us into that experience of this union with God that John's Gospel holds before us today, and they use extravagant, passionate language to shape their experience. Celia, you already know by experience that preparing an environment for the development of such Christic communion is no utopian project. Being open to the often painful conversions and transformations that will gradually align your human desire and human knowing with the desire and knowing of Christ, with his consciousness, is very costly to one's egoic self. During the 6 years of your Carmelite formation, into which you have entered with such honesty, enthusiasm, generosity, intelligence, and fullness, you've discovered that a Carmelite life is essentially about being grasped by God and having the familiar boundaries of your soul stretched and stretched so that you do become more and more capable of holding within yourself the full relational life of Jesus Christ. All the experiences of these years, all the experiences yet to come, have been and will be at the service of your becoming Christ, his identity shaping your graced identity, your becoming conscious with Christ's very consciousness, your being drawn into the mutual, dynamic, mysterious relationships that constitute Trinitarian life, thereby tapping into, in some measure, the vibrant divine energy of deep relationality and communion that underpins and runs through the entire cosmos, luring it toward its ultimate consummation in God. To the degree that you are webbed into this divine dance of life and communion, you will be united in peace to every person, every living creature, the earth itself, the entire cosmos. Better than that, the truth of this interconnectedness with all things will pour into your soul with power, urgency, and certainty, that vast energy fields of communion capable of actually influencing humanity's spirit and depth of consciousness will be created. We cannot live Carmelite life for ourselves. So just imagine a certain fullness of cosmic Christ consciousness as a field of energized patterns, drenched with divinity and community. Drenched with divinity and communion, opening up permanent capabilities for creative communion for others, many others, pointing, I suggest, to a new epoch of consciousness struggling to be born in our society, in our world. Massive forces, nationwide and worldwide, militate blatantly against such an emergence of communion consciousness. Strong evidence, I believe, of the strength of the new age that is already drawing us, calling us across a threshold. If you think this sounds far-fetched, beyond your reach, I assure you this kind of cosmic Christ consciousness is seated in the here and now, the place of our transformation. Where, Celia, in the daily living of your vows, your Carmelite vocation, the old order of selfishness, greed, violence, and unfettered autonomy yields to God's communion dream for humanity. We're given something quite specific, extremely focused, actually on Christ, but extremely focused and simple in contemplative life. The daily privileged sharing of Christ's presence in bread and wine. The ever-recurring liturgical cycle marking Jesus' life, ministry, death, resurrection, sending of the Spirit, year after year. The word of Scripture read and meditated upon day after day. The Psalms sung hour after hour. The precious but exacting solitude and intimacy of personal prayer, so essential to Carmelites. The leisure and discipline of spiritual reading and contemplative study. The faithfulness but the demands of shared meals and personal relationships. The community work and our ministry to and with our people. This concentrated focus is how love for and devotion to Jesus grows, and where communion with the cosmic Christ, the one who died on the cross and lives as the risen one, matures. You can't lose sight of this, Celia, or everything so easily becomes disconnected, segmented, open to doubt and question, even boredom and meaninglessness. A blind concentration on your own perceived needs and desires and perceptions, rather than a vast opening of your contemplative heart, the very capacity of your soul to all the joys and sorrows of the people who come to us, and to the magnitude of pain and suffering and dying that crucifies and wrenches life away from so many of God's precious people, squeezes life out of other species, and even threatens our earth home itself with destruction. No one lives this life of ours over time whose heart has not been broken open by the shocking enormity of crucified lives, children, women, men, today in our time, in our poor, violent city, at our southern borders, in those traumatized by abuse, in southern Sudan and Somalia and Yemen and Syria, in the migrant camps of our world, in the tornado and flood-destroyed towns of our country, in our school children, victims of shootings, in our sick and homeless and elderly, and on it goes. Those who are washing their robes in the blood of the Lamb. Communion with Jesus, who was crucified, situates us with him in the darkest places of human suffering and hopelessness, absorbing from Jesus God's intimate compassion and unfathomable love, incarnating in our own lives, in spite of its consequences, his solidarity with the rejected and the despised people. One with him in communicating across the vast currents of human consciousness, that compassion, that love, that utterly faithful communion that serves as a thickening of the grace that surrounds the victims of human sin and tragedy, and actually strengthens them in their inner spirits. You realize that this mind-blowing endeavor calls not merely for planning and organization, abilities and services in which we all know you definitely excel. Not solely for self-knowledge, sacrifice, and Teresian determination, which are so very necessary, but for the willingness to respond to Jesus Christ beyond the limitations of your own terms. A willingness to respond to Jesus Christ beyond the willingness of your own terms, with a love unmeasured, unstinting, overflowing, fearless, passionate. This is what Teresa is calling you to in the reading you have chosen from her Way of Perfection. This, the desire you espouse in your profession, on your profession card from John of the Cross's Spiritual Canticle. And as John Copeland, theologian who is here with us today, has written, just as Jesus' mission on behalf of the reign of God required of him something bold, that he stake his whole life and very personhood, selfhood, on their being absolutely directed toward God without measure. Just so must it be with you, daughter of Teresa and John. This is what it takes if you are not to falter, but are to walk the entire way. Go the distance. Wash your robe in the blood of the Lamb, as Jesus demands of his disciples. A love without measure that daily eschews every form of violence and division is what it takes to create energy fields of communion in this world, capable of influencing hearts and behavior and culture and politics, ultimately affecting the transformation of human consciousness, the emergence within a critical mass of a new stage of human evolution characterized by communion, not by division, rather than the dark, dehumanizing forces of heartlessness, polarization, poverty, hatred, exclusion, abuse, violence, war. Celia, we know that as you make your solemn profession, you are setting the seal on a lifelong commitment and dedicating yourself, body and soul, to this ongoing work of transformation, the era of communion, the reign of God, the new creation, converging in, held in the embrace of the cosmic Christ. We know he will shepherd you and lead you to springs of living waters. We, your sisters, promise you our support, our companionship, our fidelity, our love, our prayer, from this time onward and forever. And I know that all of you who are here with us today join our community in support of Celia as she continues her Carmelite life among us. Isn't that right? Yes.